we're going to start off with the question that basically every interview you have this whole season is going to start off with. So tell me a little bit about yourself. This is the hardest question, but it's the question you're going to get the most commonly.
Right.
So just a few things so far, just because we kind of hit a pause and you're talking here.
Yeah.
What I like to do is in all this interview prep, I don't like to have anything cold memorized. I think that that's the wrong way to do it. But what I do like to have is bullet points in my head that I want to touch on. The reason being is because if you just memorize stuff, it's going to come off as very disingenuous. Because think about it. If you're interviewing somebody, do you want them just rattling off data points and like sounding like a robot? Obviously not. So for you, think of the 3 things that you want to touch on every single time you get asked this question. So for example, whenever I got asked this question, I always started off where I was from, because sometimes if an interviewer is from there, it's an easy data point that you can kind of make a connection with, right? So I'd say where you're from. Next thing is your tie-in to medicine, or anything notable that you feel would kind of differentiate you from just like a regular response. So from there, I went from, hey, my name's Austin. I'm a 4th-year medical student from Meadville, Pennsylvania. And I kind of first got into medicine through my work as a certified nurse aide at a nursing home for 5.5 years. Like I start off kind of like with tying it in like that, so that you can give a little context of where your passion or where your background is to medicine. And then you can kind of fashion it towards anything from why that specialty to the hobbies that will support you to anything else that you feel is going to explain who you are as a person. And so data point 3 can be anything. It can be hobbies, it can be why this specialty, etc. So those are kind of like just 3 overarching things that you need to always have in the back of your mind. And of course, for every single person, this is going to be different, but you want to keep this as an elevator pitch. And so what do I mean by that? I mean that you don't want to spend really more than 60 seconds. And this is kind of just a general framework. If it takes 2 minutes, fine. But you don't want it to take 10 minutes, because then they don't have time to ask you any other questions. And your interview is probably going to be done in 15 to 20 minutes max. So you want this to be like, let's say 60 to 120 seconds. You kind of hit the hard hitting things that really define who you are as a person, and you can go from there.
That makes sense.
So I put a little bit of feedback here on the screen for you. So number 1, I would say avoid kind of like the generic, I like math and science type comments, simply just because that's too common. Everybody could say that essentially. And you want your 60 to 120 seconds to be something that's unique to you. So I would say you could probably avoid that. Not that it's wrong, but this is just, I'm trying to be as constructive as possible. Next thing is keep it streamlined for sure. So you were going perfectly down the path, and then about 3/4 of the way through, you went everywhere from like pop culture to debates to teaching people music, to like a bunch of different directions, which is fine. But the reason why I wouldn't go too broad with this is because then you almost take away different things that they can ask you in the future. Because when they're reading through your application, most people put like 1 or 2 hobbies or 3 hobbies on their experiences. So some people put that out of their 10 experiences, they took 1 line and made it into hobbies. Whether you do that or not, it's fine. But if you already touch on all of it in that aspect, then you probably took away one of their future questions. To just try and keep it streamlined. Otherwise, that was pretty solid.
Thanks. I think when I was going through it, I was feeling myself get lost, and I kind of reached for just stuff that was in my personal statement. And I'm wondering, is that kind of supposed to be what you're doing essentially, is summarizing your personal statement or summarizing your application? Or are you supposed to be saying stuff that's not in your personal statement or your application?
So that's a really, really solid question. And I wouldn't say that you should be necessarily summarizing anything. But if you can give it the 3 or 4 data points that you feel are the most important out of it, because if you think about it, the people interviewing you have literally read hundreds of applications. They've been through stacks of paper. Literally every year, our stacks of paper are like this for every interview day. It's freaking ridiculous. And so they probably have seen that stuff on your application, but they might not remember that you were the one that said it. And so that's why you kind of want to give a quick, like hard hitting, these are the things that, if you know nothing else about me, this is what I want you to know. So I kind of want you to think of your elevator pitch like this. If you know nothing else about me, this is what you should know. Those types of things. Does that make sense?
Totally.
Awesome.
Thank you.
Awesome. One thing that I'll say that everybody needs to focus on is figure out how you're going to end that comment. Because kind of like the feedback that I was given Kyle, where I was like, oh, you kind of were like doing superb, and then you got off track, and then you didn't really know how to end it. Think of how you're going to end, how you say your introduction to yourself. And so you could even say something like, oh, this is what brings me here today. Something like that. Like have a finalizing statement so the interviewer knows that you're actually done speaking, because they're not going to interrupt you. So have a finalizing statement, i.e., this is what brings me here today. All right, awesome. So let's hit you with the next question. Could you give me some of your strengths and then one weakness? This question, and then for any type of kind of foundational psych type question that they may ask you about you as a person, you want to give a data point and then directly give something to back it up. So you would say, I'm a team player, I'm resilient, and I like to take positive feedback. An example of this was whenever I was the soccer team captain, we had a conflict between two members. And at this point, I stepped in and was able to provide leadership to come to an amicable decision where it worked for both members. Something like that. You want to hit the data point and then give something to back it up. So it's like an A-B type phenomenon. And then for your weakness, one thing that I would say is something that every single applicant does pretty much universally across the board is something like taking a strength and trying to say it's a weakness. And I get it, because nobody wants to put their weakness on display. And I've probably been privy to doing this in the past myself as well. One thing I can tell you from the interviewer's standpoint, and this is just purely my experience, don't take this as like the be all end all way to do it. But when I got asked this question, I actually said something that was like totally unrelated. So for example, I was like, honestly, like I was almost late here today because my internal GPS is so bad that I can't ever find my way even out of a grocery store or something like that. You kind of almost turn it into something that's not going to show that you're quote unquote weak academically or weak at something that's related to your specialty. You kind of make it into like a fun point, because they're not going to be like, okay, so tell me about a reason why you actually suck. They're not going to say that. Like you answered their question, you kind of gave them something that's actually true. And for me, my internal GPS is so bad, I literally can't get anywhere without an actual Google Maps. And so that was my answer. And you don't have to use that specific example, but the whole objective of taking a strength and saying that's the reason you're actually weak is it's very, very common. And after hearing it about 250 times throughout an interview cycle, it gets kind of old of hearing people say like, my weakness is that I never know when to give up, or my weakness is that I have too much energy or something like that. You know what I mean? So you don't have to do that, but that's kind of just my feedback.
So as far as like for weaknesses, one that I mean, it's probably not good to recycle answers, but I usually say like, I take on too much, and I love everything. I'm excited about everything. So I want to do research, and I want to be involved in extracurriculars, and I like to volunteer, and I teach at my church. And it's really easy for me to take on too much and not say no. And then I get burned out. And so that's something and then I kind of lean into like, that's something that I'm working on. It's one of my growth edges. Is that something that sounds like your 250 answers that you're hearing during interview season?
So I will give you a caveat. If you use that specific thing, like, oh, I take on too much and this is why, the key here has to be, this is the example of me doing this. So that's what will differentiate you, because 99% of people, when they get questions like this, they kind of give you just like a generic, like, oh, I'm the person that everybody goes to, so it can be too much. It can be overwhelming or whatever it is. Like everybody has their own thing. But if you can give specific examples of why that is your exact scenario, then that's how you can differentiate yourself. And so that's a perfectly fine answer. Good question, man. And again, all the stuff that I'm giving is feedback. There's not only one right way to do any of this stuff for interview day. Obviously, if you say stuff that's highly controversial or stuff that's going to put you in a bad light, obviously that's never going to be correct no matter what. But in terms of like these little tips, tricks, that kind of thing, like how you introduce yourself, you don't have to hit these 3 or 4 things that I mentioned. Like that's totally up to you. This is just how I think about it after interviewing probably over 1,000 people at this point. So awesome, man. Good question. All right. Who wants to go next?
I actually have a quick question about the strengths and weakness. That's okay. For weakness, in the same way that you like give a example to back up your strength, can you also do the same thing for a weakness and like kind of try to put a positive spin on it? Like, for example, like, oh, my problem is, or my weakness is this, and this came up on this rotation, but since then I've been trying to work on it by doing this. Like, is that what they're looking for too?
Yeah, that's kind of similar to what I was saying to Bryson, is if you want to do it that way, then you have to have a unique example of it. There's nothing worse than these interviews whenever the person you're talking to gives you a bunch of just blanket statements that are very generic, because then you don't feel like you actually knew the person at all. Like after Bryson just said his answer, he's talking about like going to church, teaching there. He's taking on too many responsibilities at XYZ different avenues. Like you feel like you got a little bit of him in that answer. You see what I'm saying? So I think he did a good job of being concise about that and kind of listing out the things that really hit home on that. So if you can be specific, I think you're golden either way. All the key for interviews is to be specific without getting off track. So let me put that on here somewhere. That's kind of a good reminder to interviews, is to be specific but not get off track. And the reason for that is because you want to remember the people that you interview. Like I remember like one of my all-time favorite interview experiences with a applicant at a program was we spent half of the interview talking about his party business. And so he has a business where he had like inflatable balloons and like all kinds of different like party guns and stuff like that to like shoot confetti out. And he like went really hard on it. Like it was like a legit business. He was doing really well with it. And we spent almost the entire time talking about that because it was so memorable and so interesting. And you could tell he was passionate about it. When you're talking to an interviewer, they're going to gravitate more to whatever you're passionate about talking about. So you can steer the entire interview however you want to. But you have to just keep in the back of your mind, like, what is it that my strengths are that I can discuss? And so for me, just to give you guys like some personal examples, I knew for a fact that I didn't really like research. Like, it's just not my thing. I hate it. I just did it to do it. Like, you know what I mean? Every single specialty has their own specific criteria of how many research applications and experiences that you should have going into it to have a high chance of matching. And so I did it for that reason only. And so I never, ever, ever discussed research in an interview unless I was directly asked a question about one of my projects, because I knew I couldn't speak about it with passion. And so that's the absolute key for you guys, is to know the things that are your strengths and the things that you're passionate about, and to steer your entire interview towards those actual aspects of your discussion, because you can literally make a phenomenal impression or a horrible impression just by what you speak passionately about. And so that's really like one of the biggest things, is to know in the back of your head the things that you want every interviewer to know about you by the end of the 15 to 30 minutes that you have with them. So, all right.